Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Theology in the Raw. My guest today is Treneé McGee. Treneé is a state representative representing the 116th District in West Haven, Connecticut. She is a Democrat and a Christian, and she is pro-life. And so that makes for an interesting combination. And so that's what we talk about on this podcast. We talk about her pro-life position and how she sees the abortion industry as systemically racist. So that's where we're going, folks. So buckle up, get ready for a lively Theology in the Raw conversation, and please welcome to the show for the first time, the one and only Treneé McGee. Treneé, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule as a politician to come on Theology in the Raw. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
And she's so busy that she's doing this on her phone in her car.
Yeah. It's one of those moments where your schedule just flies out the window and you know, you have a last minute meeting and so it's one of those days.
I will try to keep this under an hour. So, because I know you have places to go, people to see. So let's jump right in. For those who don't know who you are, tell us a bit about yourself. You can start however early you want, whatever details you want to give.
Yeah. My name is Treneé McGee, and I am currently a state legislator for the state of Connecticut. I serve and represent the 116, which is West Haven. Most people know New Haven because of Yale, so I am in between New Haven and another area, Milford, Orange. And I did not think I'd be in politics. I started acting when I was 3 years old, and I started professionally working as a kid. And then I went to college for acting, and I kind of hit this, I think all college students hit this place of, is this something I actually want to do, or do I want to go in another direction? And that's kind of where I was. I had really immersed myself in college into many leadership opportunities, and so I was a part of student government. So I kind of liked that space. But was still clinging to what I had always known. And when I graduated, I worked for a theater, and I was seeking representation from agencies. And then around the beginning of 2019, I just felt God just say, this is kind of not where I want you to be right now. And that was really tough because I was working to get closer to something I've always wanted, And then around that time, I started to really seek God and fast and pray. And I was fasting. We were doing the Daniel's fast with my church. So it was like I had a lot of support. And then the door for politics opened up, and I was asked to be on my town's town committee. And at that time, I was like, I don't know if I could really commit to that. I've never done that before, but I knew that it was where God was leading me. I just knew it. It came too quick, too easy. The pieces were all in place for me to deny, like, oh, this isn't, this isn't God, And so I ultimately ended up running for the city council. And then like less than 2 years later, I was running for the state house. So I know that's kind of like, I know that's kind of like a short story, a long story made short. But that was what the journey was like for me to get to the Capitol. Okay.
That's a whirlwind.
Yeah.
Maybe it just seemed to happen so quickly. Does it feel like a big whirlwind to you? Or?
Oh yes. It happened very quick. It happened very quickly, and at the same time, in my personal life, I had gone through a breakup, and I there were very close friends I had that I physically felt like things were just ripping away from my body, And so things would be extrapolated from my life. And at that time I didn't know, this is, where God is leading me, and these people can't come, and that's okay. There's people there for a season. So it was definitely a physical, emotional, and spiritual whirlwind, because I had to trust God in a way that I had never really exercised before, because I was going into a space I did not go to school for, I did not feel qualified for, until God was like, well, if I'm leading you there, you're ready.
So you weren't naturally into politics? Is that something that you've kind of gotten into more recently that wasn't always in the back of your mind at all, or?
It was never in the back of my mind as something I'd be doing. But I always loved government. It was my favorite subject in school: history, government. Um, like I remember enjoying Christiane Amanpour, just having fun watching it. So I did always, I always loved government, and God is so funny because it's not something I would have ever pursued, but I could see how it makes sense with, some of the things that I really enjoy doing. And then I have fun doing it. And I think a large part of government is truly a call. It really is a call. Either people get into it because they go to school for it, or nepotism, or it's truly a call. And, when God puts you where you're purposed for, it just aligns. It's just alignment, true alignment. Because in this space, I feel like I'm fulfilling more of a purpose in my life than I think I'd be doing. I'd be on set right now.
Yeah. So
yeah.
I came across your name recently, really, when our mutual friend Justin Gibney told me about you. So, like we all do today, I start Googling around. The first thing I saw was this 3-minute short speech you gave at the March for Life rally in January 2023. You're a Democrat politician speaking at a pro-life rally. So that alone, I was like, whoa, what's going on here? But then oh my word, those 3 minutes were absolutely, it blew me away. So I'm going to have, we're going to, let's roll the clip, and then I'm going to have you kind of maybe unpack some of these really provocative themes you talked about in that 3-minute clip. All right, go ahead and roll the clip.
Hello, pro-life generation! Millennials and Gen Z! To Fannie Lou Hamer and the Black women of the movement, your work to educate our community was not in vain. Your knowledge and insight into the systemically racist abortion industry is being exposed. Your no to Margaret Sanger the day she came to your doors and told you to abort your children will be heard around the world. The younger generation of Black, Latina, Indigenous, and women of color are taking our rightful place to expose the mass genocide of our children and the stain of blood across the movement that says it's standing to protect us. No. You've used us as a shield to hide your trauma and tug of war in your own community. You've mocked impoverished communities, all while putting clinics in them. You've told me that I can't be Black and pro-life because Black women need abortions more than anyone. You tell us that we are disproportionately impacted, never giving us our due proportions from the start. You have pocketed off the fear and pain of women and minors who don't feel fit to parent. You've handed minors abortion pills in silence and told them not to tell their parents. The aches and pains of rape, trafficking, and fear of mothering has made you rich. I stand here today and I proclaim life. I proclaim that future generations will live and not die. That they will be seen as enough to live. I stand in place of the pro-life Black women across the globe who are suffering in silence. And we resist the evil strategy to pluck us out like weeds. The time is today, and let it be forevermore, that we resolve in our hearts that we are different and yet the same. We bleed the same. Let us not use talking points to justify our arguments, but be effective listeners and create whole life from the womb to the tomb solutions. May we make room to hear Black women speak and believe them in this movement. And as we march toward the prize of life, let us to understand that we must march hand in hand, that we must march together, because in unity there is strength. So we must deal with our emotional prejudices and the things that we are committed to in order to not only protect life, but sustain life. because we are going to be different. We are not only pro-life, but we care about moms too. We care about families. We care about educations. Pro-life for the whole life. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Where do we start? So you used the phrase systemically racist abortion industry. Can you, and you gave a little bit of, I mean, in 3 minutes, you don't have time to kind of like give the whole background or evidence for things you're saying. Can you unpack that a little more? I think some people might be, I think some people in this podcast will be like, yeah, absolutely. Others might be like, whoa, I never thought about the abortion industry being systemically racist. Can you unpack that for us a bit more?
Yeah, so actually starting at the root, Margaret Sanger established the birth control. At that time, she was the president of the National Birth Control League, and she had gathered with some of the world's wealthiest individuals, I think one being J.P. Morgan, and all of these like eugenicist-minded people. Eugenicist is a belief that you remove the poorest and the feeble-minded, these were her words, the impoverished, the no use and no good for society individuals. You sort of remove them and you get to the cream of the crop. And there are so many different measures by which people achieve that. Some have done it through abortion, the Tuskegee Airmen experiment. The Tuskegee experiment is another. I know like there are so many different like theories out there that like vaccines are another. And so there are so many different ways that people have been removed, slavery from society, human trafficking, and one in this specific case is abortion. And so Margaret Sanger had begun to mobilize churches and communities, by which she partnered with people who really believed in her agenda. And actually, I had found a letter she wrote back December 7th, early 1900s, where she says that like Hitler came to her in a dream and placed a crow above her head and sort of gave her the courage to follow her heart.
Oh
And yeah, she had done a lot of wicked work in Brooklyn, New York. She went to Puerto Rico. She tested birth control on Puerto Rican women. And she actually stood before the Connecticut General Assembly as well, and kind of put up a fight for birth control at that time. And so it was really established with the mind and the idea to rid society of people, and specifically Black people. Some people say African American people. And so that is why when we begin to actually establish these buildings, majority of clinics landed in 79% of impoverished Black communities. Oftentimes people tell people just like corner stores are in Black communities. There's abortion clinics and proximity means a lot. A lot of times people will use a service of whatever they live close by. Had it been a Whole Foods and maybe a really great health facility, we would see a different outcome. But the foundation of it, what is systemic, the foundation of it was to literally rid society of people. And one thing she would always say is that the Black population was growing like weeds. Like there's just so many of them. And so it didn't grip the community that wanted to, even birth control, because Black women were saying at that time, we are just a few generations removed from slavery. We want to have our children. We want to have a lot of children. I mean, my great grandmother had 10 kids, so it was a very common thing to have children. And in many different ways, it was for labor, it was for community, it was to make sure that, we had enough people to raise a farm, but foundationally, it was very familial, the foundation of it. And so Margaret Sanger sort of had her own plan, and she really believed in some insane way that to remove poverty is to remove the people that she believed produces and are the source of poverty and of a very poor nation, community, and society. Um, and so actually, I was protesting the death of Eric Gardner when I was in college in New York. And I had done a project where I, at that time, was the president of the Black and Latino Student Association. So I had access to the main server, and I sent this email out to the entire student body. And I said, "We're gonna march, to join the protest in support of Eric Gardner," because I had friends who had lived on that corner where he was murdered.
Oh wow.
And at the same time, like it's so interesting. I tell people all the time, like civil rights really in racial justice opened up the door for my advocacy for life. And at the same time, while I'm protesting against the murder of Eric Gardner, I'm learning that there are more Black babies aborted in New York than born.
Oh,
and it was right in the heart of where I go to college. And so I could not make sense of it for myself. How could I protest this and not that? Um, and so I remember actually saying one time in college, like, yeah, for life. And one of the girls in the room just freaked out, like, you're what? You know, and I studied acting at Marymount Manhattan College, College of the Liberal Arts. So I remember saying that and just never sharing that again.
Huh.
But I knew that I had to be vocal about it, that it really required education, because I don't think a lot of people knew, the foundation of this.
Okay, so what would you say to? I mean, it's one thing to acknowledge that the roots are filled with this blatant racism, eugenics, and everything. Would you say that the industry now is still like that? And what evidence would you give for that? I guess part of the evidence would be the fact that these abortion clinics are situated in impoverished, largely Black communities, like you said. Is that are there other things you'd point to say, hey, if you open your eyes, you see that there's systemic racism that's integrated throughout this whole thing?
Yeah, well, here's the deal. As a Black pro-life woman in the Democratic Party, I myself have experienced racism from liberals and progressives. And I say that because the slogan for this industry is "Stand with Black women."
Yeah.
They're very brilliant in their marketing. Stand with Black women, my body, my choice. I mean, you have to really think about it. This is like really good marketing. It's very similar to Margaret saying, um, if we get to the best of every community, we'll have the best country in the world. And so the reason why I bring up the slogan is because it's stand with Black women unless they have a different opinion that we maybe don't agree with, then we're not standing with her at all. And in fact, I've had women say, I will never forget talking to someone who said, well, the clinic should be in your community. Your people need them more than anything. And I'm like, but you're supposed to be an ally, So I do think that this specific movement, it's very important to, I will say this, specifically white women. This specific like women's rights movement is believed to be theirs. And so when you have a Black woman who's coming along and saying, actually, like the need is much different. And like I had pockets of conversation with different women. And I'm like, Black women, and I'm like, have you guys felt like you lacked access to abortion? And they're like, no, we've never felt that way. Everybody knows where to get an abortion.
Huh.
And so you have this steady promoting that Black and Latin women will lack access. And what I realize is that we are the mask for, to me, the pain and trauma of white women who often use Black and Latin women as a mask to hide whatever it is they're really protesting. And in this sense, I'm specifically speaking about like your, more like a little bit more left leaning women who, the women's movement is so important to. And so I kind of have expressed that. And I'm in Connecticut where like, many Republicans are socially liberal as well. This is like, it's like a different type of politics here.
Okay.
I ran against a Republican who was pro-choice. So it was like pro-choice Republican and pro-life Democrat. But I still see some of the residue of racism today in the abortion industry, for sure. The marketing, setting up programs in like schools of color. And I could be so wrong, but I doubt like Planned Parenthood is going to Choate and Hopkins. Like I doubt it, but they're definitely going to, schools in the inner city. So
do you think it's not,
yeah.
Well, as you're talking, I'm thinking, so it might not be blatant kind of Margaret Sanger level racism. It's more subtle, and maybe even, do you think some of the racism in the industry, people who are in the industry actually don't even see it? Or do you think some do and they're just kind of like, you know what I mean? Like, could it be just, it's just like ignorance of just absorbing certain messages that they've heard other people say, so they don't realize
Yeah,
how racist it can be? Maybe that's the best
yeah,
reading of the situation. I don't.
yeah. There's definitely a bit of there are two things. So one, there's propaganda. I really just think that people just don't know the truth, and they've been fed what they've been fed for so long and believe it. There's a woman who lives in my town, and she was a pro-life Democrat. She ended up like leaving the party. I think she's independent now. She's very pro-life. But she said to me not too long ago, she said, I really believe people 50 and under just don't know the truth about this industry like I do
Mm,
before Roe versus Wade was implemented.
mm,
And I think a bit of it is that. And I think when you lace a movement in women's empowerment, and women had experienced many different challenges in all different facets of society, then you'll have people bandwagoning the support and aid of and for women, because I believe God is raising up women in many different ways. However, it's false. It's really truly false. We've created a false sense of empowerment. And then now you have, like, I'm reached out to by young women all the time who are so traumatized by their abortion choice.
really?
And so I do think that, yes, yes, very much so. And I do think it's a bit of, the abortion industry has a lot of money and therefore has a big lobby and therefore has a lot of access and resources to educate people the way they want them to be educated.
Okay. Yeah. What are some other things? You mentioned that there's just a lot of ignorance around the industry. And by the way, I think there might be a lag in our video here. I just want to acknowledge that, just in case I say something that sounds like I'm cutting you off. Um, what are some things that you would say people are most ignorant about? I mean, you've touched on a couple of them already, but are there other like big picture things that you're like, man, if people just knew the truth about X, Y, or Z, they might have a different view of the industry?
I think several different things. I think one, the lack of education around miscarriage management and ectopic pregnancies.
Okay.
When you have when Roe versus Wade was like on the brink of overturning, you had people saying a woman who has a miscarriage has to carry a dead baby, or a woman with an ectopic pregnancy. And because so legislatively and morally, a miscarriage is not an abortion, but
Right.
medically they have coined it a spontaneous abortion.
Huh. That's really
And
wow.
so, which is such an insult. Yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
abortion
And it's
by
such an
definition
insult.
implies human agency, doesn't it? Like somebody did something, like it seems like that's intrinsic to the term, that there's a human agency involved in the act, whereas a miscarriage is not. I don't That just seems odd that they would conflate the two. Well, I
Exactly.
guess that's your point. They're using rhetoric to as part of propaganda.
Exactly. Exactly. And the goal is to then make you sort of look like a monster for saying I'm pro life and I do not support abortion, and and this is X, Y, and Z are the reasons. And so then oftentimes you're faced with questions like, so what if a woman is carrying a dead baby, or what if a woman is going through a miscarriage? So there's so much misinformation, and it's being pushed by Hollywood. It's being
Hmm.
pushed by the entertainment industry. You have people in all spheres of influence that are pushing this false information. You have doctors who get paid lots of money by these industries. I mean, now you have pharmacists that can prescribe birth control with no medical history. And so the love of money is the root of all evil. And so that's really the core to me
Hmm.
of some of the issues that I see today. And even like, Black and Latin women, like access to abortion. Now they've thrown Indigenous women in it. And I'm like, the Native American population is so small when it comes to abortion stats that oftentimes they're not even on the list. So just, different things like that, you sort of hear and see, and, or that abortion is an empowering choice. And sometimes you have to make that choice because you want to get your degree, or you want to have a successful career. There was once a point in time where being a mom was being a superhero. And today, so much of what we see is being a mom is a burden. It's the worst decision you can make for yourself. It'll slow your life down. You won't have a career. It'll mess your body up. You have women who are getting surrogates just because they don't want to change their bodies to look a different way. So, there are many different influences, I think, around us. But what I really love about Gen Z is they are on a quest for truth. And I think that's why when you get on TikTok, you see so many conspiracy theories, because I was watching a video the other day that was like, are mermaids real? And it was like a breakdown how mermaids were real. It even went to the fallen angels. And it was really powerful. Like, it was actually really powerful. But these Gen Z kids were on social media. They were talking about sirens and mermaids, right? Like, then there was another video about the population. Then I saw another video about the best states, the states with the best food. They're really on a quest for truth, and I think it's so powerful of this generation. And I think because they face different challenges, the conversation around like oppression or all of those different things may look a little different than they did generations before. And that even includes abortion, when you have so many young women who have access to way more resources than they did before, who are getting their degrees, who are starting businesses. And so oftentimes I've even shared with like some of my colleagues, and we've had really great discussion, as a millennial woman, young one, sometimes it's offensive when you hear young women talked about in a way where we are not substantially responsible and making responsible decisions, and that we always need to rely on this sort of cork or this band-aid of abortion, because we're irresponsible. That's sort of the way we're projected. And I think that younger women are so much smarter than that. And even for myself, my friends are not fearing having children because of their careers or that it'll negatively impact their lives. They're more so concerned about the issues around maternal health and infant mortality. And so I think, we as a society, we're in a really great space of educating and enlightening, with resources like TikTok, where you'll see someone kind of challenge what's the norm or what's popular. And it kind of is giving us leverage to really angle how we want this conversation to be as people who stand for life. And I do think being whole life in this time and season is significant to young people, because for them, they are very much so social challenges or social justice driven, whether it's like climate change. Climate change is huge. Climate change is so huge. Agriculture, aquaculture, starting businesses, the goal of building generational wealth. I called a realtor the other day, and he said that the first time home buyers program in Connecticut, a lot of young people are buying multifamily houses out the gate because they want to establish some form of wealth and income. So I really do think we're in just a different day in time. And I know the abortion industry understands it's shrinking in a way, which is why they begin to tap into other communities and other groups, I believe, to keep their momentum going.
So are you saying that Gen Z would be more at least questioning abortion as a fundamental human right or as a moral good, like as opposed to maybe past or older generations? Are they, because there's this thought that, as society progresses, progressive values will be more widely embraced by each succeeding generation. And I've heard both sides of this. Some people say Gen Z is actually reversing that tide a little bit. They're questioning abortion, but I've heard other people say no, they're way more, accepting it. Do you have any data, or have you looked at this? Or
So what I have seen is so what I've personally seen is Gen Z by like droves. It's like 70+% of Gen Z, their top priority is climate change.
really?
Abortion was like 4. It was
Huh.
climate change, student debt cancellation.
Hmm.
Um, I forgot the fourth. I mean the third, and then abortion. I
Okay.
do think it's not as I sort of am gonna go back to it's not we're not in like the era of the hippie movement, or this like mass move of like sexual liberation, and like watching Jesus Revolution, kind of learning that like hippies desired good things just the wrong way. And so what I see with Gen Z is that even if they're dating, they could be dating or engaging in different things, but there are just so many other things to do than have sex. And that's
Yeah.
the reality of it. There are so many things to do than engage in sexual activity. But what I do know is that there are, I think 60% of Gen Z would prefer to buy an item if they know that it's going to an important cause.
Hmm.
And the most important cause that's raising the most money is truly climate change. And that's why like I said, I'm a young millennial, but I had to sort of school myself on climate change because I sit on the environmental committee, and we've had several young people come before us and testify. I don't really see college students testifying, young college students testifying in public health in support of abortion. I don't. But they
Hmm.
come before the education committee. And I actually see parents say, we don't really want our kids to learn about these things. We want to teach our own kids these things. And so I just think that, I tend to see this discussion as being way more important for like middle-aged women or women who are a bit older,
Hmm.
who are like to say bands off their body. And sometimes I'll say, well, you've had that era and that time of having children and of
Hmm.
investing in your children's future. I believe it's time to listen to younger women and listen to what's really important to us. And I will tell you, I hear a lot about maternal health. A million millennials are becoming moms every year. Uh, I mean, I see millennial women talk about wanting families and
Hmm.
wanting children. This like idea that women are striving to be single parents. No, this idea that women are striving to be like, liberated by abortion. I just don't I don't see the realism in that. I see what is done in media, but I don't see the realism in that around a society that to me is oftentimes influenced by culture.
That's really helpful, and that's yeah. In my anecdotal experience with both, I'm a Gen Xer, so and a lot of my ministry is with people my age and younger, all the way down to Gen Z. I'm a parent of 4 Gen Z kids, so I'm
Oh,
able
cool.
to kind of peek behind the door of all these different generations, and it's I find it fascinating. And Gen Z, I agree
Yeah.
with you. The the truth seeking, like they're just you can't put them in a box. And I see so many generalizations about Gen Z that I'm like, I don't know if that's very accurate. I'm curious though, I'm curious your perspective on the abortion. I almost call it the abortion industrial complex. Maybe we should call it that. Um, yeah, having systemically racist roots and actually ongoing systemically racist elements. Is that how widely shared is that opinion among specifically among women of color in your experience? Like, is Treneé McGee is she just an anomaly, or is this more widespread than people might think?
It's definitely more widespread. I tell a lot. I've oftentimes told my conservative colleagues, when the topic of abortion is oftentimes used as a It's unfortunate because I think the racial and systemic racial part of abortion, from the conservative side, has been used as more of a talking point
Mm-hmm.
than it has been as a means to educate people.
Okay.
And, I share with my colleague, she said, I just don't understand why there are certain people in communities who are not moved by that. And I told her, well, it's not that they're moved by that. I just think there are so many barriers and there are so many things that are racially driven and motivated and that have been a problem that you're just like, okay, this is another. Like, okay, I mean, everything seems to be a barrier that way. So, but after I won the primary, after the turn of Roe versus Wade overturned in June, and my primary was in August. It was in the news. This is the hottest, election to watch this year. And I think what freaked people out was how I got reelected in a like really large amount of number in a lead from my competitor, my opponent. But it made clear a few things. That one, the largest population in my district are Black homeowners, and I try to explain to people that one, Black people are pro-life, even if not all. What I often hear on the doors canvassing is, "I don't believe in abortion." They may not call themselves pro life, but they say, "I don't believe in abortion." I've heard so many older women say, like, "I kept my child. I don't believe in abortion." It's really common. And those who have chosen abortion, you don't talk about it because it was a bad decision and it was shame. And we don't do that, So like that's kind of the narrative around that. So I had colleagues who were shocked, and I tried to explain to them, well, this is just not a top priority for individuals. And the video that went viral before March for Life was me speaking on the floor, and I read the top 10 priorities for the Black community, and abortion was not one. It was lowering childcare costs, it was lowering healthcare costs, it was accessing healthy food, it was for millennials, it was canceling student loans, but it was not, in fact, abortion. And I don't think abortion has ever been a Black public health issue.
Mm.
I think I think right now, with Black maternal health and even the air quality in certain communities, or the lead in water, has been what's forged conversations, or housing has forged conversations in the Black community more than abortion has. I really just don't see women really comfortable talking about it. It just takes courage to stand up and say, I'm a Democrat, or I'm on this side, I'm a Republican, or I'm independent, and I'm very pro-life, especially in a society where we've deemed that to be like anti-woman.
This episode is sponsored by the Pour Over Podcast. Oh my word, I love the Pour Over Podcast. It is a trustworthy news resource guiding people toward eternal hope. It's not Republican, it's not Democrat, it's not conservative, it's not liberal. Instead, it is a Christ-centered summary of the major events going on in politics and in culture. Like most of you, I am so tired of news outlets that are so clearly biased toward the right or to the left. I want to stay informed with what's going on, but I hate how traditional news outlets shape my heart and try to win me to a certain side. I mean, if you don't believe me, just ask yourself this question. After listening to, say, I don't know, CNN or Fox News for like 30 minutes, am I less or more motivated to love my neighbor and my enemy? If the answer is less, then Houston, we have a huge problem, a discipleship problem. This is why I'm so excited about the Pour Over Podcast. Each episode is only about 7 minutes long, and they just tell you about what's going on in the world. They don't tell you how to interpret the various events or how you should feel about what's going on. Instead, they just let you know about the facts of what's going on while reminding listeners that our ultimate identity and hope is in Jesus Christ. I've even met some of the people at the Pour Over, and they are super awesome. They're not some like closeted liberal or closeted conservative think tank. They're truly, genuinely just trying to keep us informed while staying focused on Christ. So don't let traditional media outlets steal your affection away from loving people who might vote differently than you. Instead, check out and subscribe to the Pour Over Podcast in your favorite podcast app. What's it like being a pro-life Democrat? Is that again, maybe that's a higher percentage than people real. Well, so you mentioned, I think, tell me if I'm wrong, the majority of Black people would vote Democrat, and yet also the majority of Black people would also be pro-life, or at least not pro-abortion. Is that correct? Those two assumptions?
I mean, yeah, I would say this is majority Democrats vote pro-life in ways that I think majority Democrat women, just like I think majority white women specifically vote Republican. I think it was like 74 to 78% white women for or maybe 84%. For Black women it's like 92. So it's kind of like the same on both sides. But there were many people in my district who'd say, like, I'm pro-life too. I stand with Representative McGee. I'm a Democrat, but I'm also pro-life. I do think, in many different ways historically, when you look at something like police brutality, that's something that people feel like they cannot control, versus like abortion. You kind of feel like you're in control of that. And so I think there are many different reasons why Black individuals vote Democrat, but I know for sure, I heard there is a doctor. He's not really the most liked person. He's very pro in his beliefs, but his name is Dr. Umar, and he said, "Don't get this twisted. Black people are very pro-life," and people were in the comments like, "Yeah, no, we really, really, we really are." But it kind of goes back to proximity, and it goes back to, when this clinic was the only means of healthcare or access to health that I had. But just like fast food, it presents as a, trusting friend, but it's kind of killing you slowly,
Yeah.
And so I definitely had that experience in my district. And it was cool to hear the older Black women come to the polls and say, well, we're pro-life too. And we're Democrat and we're voting for you. Yeah, Catholics as well.
Oh, it's true. Yeah, and Catholics would Catholics be, again, we're dealing with just broad brush, statements, but would Catholics be on the whole more Democrat than Republican percentage wise? And yet they would be definitely pro-life.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in my district, for sure, they're Democrat, but they're pro-life. There are conservative Catholics in my district as well. But I think I received like an influx of emails from pro-life Catholics who were Democrat.
Okay. So I'm curious. Maybe the elephant in the room question people want to know is, okay, you're obviously very passionate about being pro-life. Why are you a Democrat? What is it? Is it climate change? Is it healthcare? Is it student loan? I mean, some of these other issues as well, or?
Yeah, because I don't think either party really owns what it means to stand on a life platform. And I think, for me in many different ways, I am influenced by my morals and my values. And there are, I have colleagues on the Republican side who vote conservative, but they're not morally driven.
Okay.
And or like have a faith. So for me, it is, there's a whole like slew of things. And I do like the emphasis around climate change, especially as it's embracing the younger generation. I love the emphasis around student debt, and I sort of talked about that as well. Oftentimes I tell people, if you really care about what's an issue for Black women, like ditch abortion and let's talk about student loans, because right now Black women are more educated by race and gender. So if you really cared about what was disparaging us, let's talk about how we're paying back student loans for the rest of our lives or deferring them. And so there are many different issues to me that are really important on the Democrat side, but I do think that we need people on both sides to vote the same way. And if there's not anyone keeping a balance on a side, it can swing in a direction that actually isn't a reflection of what people want and need. So I think your average Democrat is like not progressive.
Really?
Like not progressively left. They're not. I don't even really think like, I think I don't know how much of, I was looking at the map of Congress the other day, and it was like the blue dogs, the progressives, and I don't really know how many of the progressives, and I'm not attacking Congress. I respect all of them for the work they do. I just don't know how progressive some of their districts are. Maybe when it comes to housing policies, or even education in terms of, public education or public free community college, because there are different levels of progressivism. But specifically when it comes to social issues, I don't know how progressive all of, these districts are, because I think some people are having a hard time embracing that, like, being a woman is a feeling.
Right.
It's,
yeah.
I think people don't like that. It's just like I kind of spoke before. It just takes courage. And for me, I speak out against what I don't agree with my party.
Do you think a lot of it is going back is propaganda, is stuff people hear on the news, social media, and they get maybe a warped perception of how the majority of people are actually thinking?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. This is why I turn off the news.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Even, it's, I thank God for this position that he's put me in, because like right now I'm writing and finishing up and producing a play. And I feel like the arts and politics sort of run adjacent, because the entertainment industry is so, it's what inspires a lot of politics. But oftentimes I will see a bill, or people challenge a bill or protest a bill in mainstream media. And then, I read it and I'm like, that's not what the bill said. That's not even the context or content of the bill. And so I do think that the media has played a part in warping people's minds. I had a teacher back in the day who used to call TV television. He says, it tells a lie to your vision. That's what he used to say. And so I do think, when you have mainstream, like for example, a Fox and a CNN, which at one point I think were funded by the same people, kind of keeping people on different ends on purpose. When it was like 84% of us really truly identify as a middle. 6% identify as progressive, and 8% identify as progressive, and 6% identify as really ultra right. I think there's a lot of middle. There's actually more middle than not. And there are people who share with me, listen, I have nothing against this community, or, I believe everyone should have access to housing and clean water, but I just don't agree with these things, So, but we're in a society where there's diplomacy is kind of going out the window, and you're either anti, or you are phobic, or you're all of these different things. And sometimes we have to ask hard questions and be able to defend them or stand in them or research them ourselves before we sort of, you're canceled and I don't want to talk to you because we don't agree.
I have a random question, but you kind of stuff you were saying kind of unearthed it in my own mind. So I'm just going to ask it. And this is Theology in the Raw, so that's what we do. And you as a politician, I mean, you've been able to peek behind the curtain a little bit, right? And a lot of us are kind of like, what's going on back there, In your opinion, what side has more power and money and maybe would produce more fear in your own heart, the far right or far left? Like the radical progressive left, or the kind of Christian nationalist far radical right? Because I talked to friends who give completely opposite opinions on a question like that. I'm like, what's the right answer? I don't know. Like, is it the Christian nationalists, on the right, or is it the George Soros? Is that even like would he be an example of somebody on the far left that has a lot of money and power and is pulling strings and stuff? Or does that question even make sense? I don't even know if that just came to my mind as you were talking.
It does. So I say this often, and I know, like, people it's controversial and people can kind of think what they want, but to me, they're the same person. They're the same.
That would be my assumption too.
They're the same person. A lot of them are people who grew up wealthy. And not only are they the same person, but their family, their brother and sister, they are like progressive white women to me, or progressive individuals in general. But this is when it comes to social issues, so I have to be specific, because like what I see more so is like progressive white women. They are fighting far right conservative white men. They're fighting each other. And yeah, they're fighting each other. So they're the same person. They understand each other because they all grew up in the same house. So whether it's the father and the daughter, or the niece and the uncle, or the brother and the sister, they all understand each other. You know, I always find this fascinating, but there's like a common trend of progressive white women who marry conservative white men.
Huh.
There's
why is that? What?
Because I think they understand each other. They really understand each other. Now it's funny. They won't give me a pass and be my friend as a, Black woman who they're like, oh no, on this she's conservative. We can't be friends with her,
Yeah.
But I think a bit of that is, and this is like this is something nationwide. This is actually a pretty common thing. But I think it's because there's a part of them that understands each other, and the fight for liberation in women comes from a place of trauma. It really, and to me, it goes back to like the slave master's wife who endured tons of trauma. And I think a lot of it is, it's kind of like my theory. I haven't released it, but I wrote a blog on this because what I see is them fighting each other, and it's just to two extremes. It's kind of to see which one can go the extreme, the furthest. So they both have money. Sometimes they're two wings of the same bird. They both know each other's operations so that they can one up each other. I think media is a little bit more liberal, but less and less people are kind of tuning in that way. People are leaning more toward independent sources. They say that now, like, even more people are watching like BBC News or international news because they don't care. They just reported how it is. And so I think people are kind of like leaning away. Like my generation of like young people are not tuning into CNN. They're not, or Fox as much. It's kind of, that's like definitely an older generation. But they're definitely they're the same person, the silver spoon person who, in one way, Justin actually said this recently at Jude 3. He said, you have to kind of see the good in people. When you kind of see the good in them and like what it is they're trying to achieve, it kind of shifts your perspective on how to even view them or work with them or engage with them.
Well, I there was a study that I read a while back that said the exact thing you did, that when you go to the far extremes on each side, you get the same kinds of people, usually white, educated, elite, wealthy. Like they're very much come from the same, like you said, the same kind of family. So I think there, I mean, as always, I forget where I read these things, but I mean, I think there is even data on that. That's been my anecdotal experience, I would say, as well, is when I hear the far right, it sounds very much like the far left and vice versa, just different things they're fighting for. So you mentioned, I mean, you mentioned kind of mainstream media and propaganda and everything. Do you have some favorite journalists that, since we're on this topic, that you feel like, man, if here's some outlets or writers or people or thinkers that like they're very fair and trustworthy, or you're kind of snickering a little bit.
It's so hard. It's so hard today. It's really hard. I mean, I really like Esau McCaulley. I love his sort of opinion pieces and such. They're really good. They come from like a good perspective. I mentioned Christiane Amanpour, but when she's on TV, occasionally I love to watch her thing. You never really know how she votes, what she supports. What she's never been too vocal about those things. And I think she's done, just that age of journalism is like leaving a little bit. So I still listen to her and kind of engage in her things. There's a source, I'm forgetting the name of it, but it's independent and it's like crowdfunded almost. It's funded by people. That's a source that I like to read. And that there's a wide range of kind of like opinion pieces too, from like college age to older, more experienced, writers. But I just kind of wax and wane. And oftentimes when you're reading Bill all the time and you kind of know the truth that the media maybe not want to support. So I watch local news to know what's going on, but I have like pulled away from news a bit because it's so frustrating.
Well, I think, I mean, this is a whole nother conversation, but it's interesting how influential independent sources are, or even like podcasts. And I think there's a social
Yeah.
experiment. I would love you, actually, as a Democrat, I would love your thoughts on this. Because I dabble. I try to keep up with what's going on, but I am so far removed from like the ins and outs of political movements and stuff. But I am on a sociological level. I'm kind of fascinated at RFK Jr.'s popularity, even though he's given minimal platform on any mainstream news outlets. But he's going on every single long form podcast, and I think people are not, maybe they don't realize how popular these outlets are. I mean, the classic, of course, is, Joe Rogan gets 12 million views per episode, where CNN might get 1 million. So he's like 12 times more exposure, and that's obviously an anomaly. But there's other shows that are very popular as well. And if you're hitting all of these shows, you're actually covering way more ground. And when you're not on, mainstream outlets are so short, it's soundbitey, it's this, that. But when you go on, you can talk for 2 or 3 hours. People can actually hear your ideas in context. I don't know. It's an interesting. I feel like it's the same social experiment that we had with Donald Trump and Twitter back in 2016. We realized, like, oh my word, he got elected because of Twitter. Like, really, like And I think now I'm wondering if these independent sources, primarily through podcasts, are mixing things up in a way that we don't really realize until we'll look back in 5 to 10 years to kind of see. I don't know. I'm just totally thinking out loud. I could totally be 100% wrong. Yeah.
I mean, podcasts are incredible. I think for some reason, I think so much of people still believe that especially people in government and positions of power, believe that the greater influence is being seen.
Huh.
And specifically on mainstream platforms. MSNBC, ABC, CNN, The View, The Talk, whichever. I still think the Faulkner Report and Fox. I still think that people believe that is the means to gain mobility and to gain a more like something you could see, like kind of support, or the comments on Facebook Live, but a lot of young people are engaging in podcasts, and there's a little bit. It kind of reminds me of like, Dave Chappelle when he's like, I'm going to Netflix because I know I could just be myself.
Yeah.
Versus like, some of these other networks that there are so many different restrictions. As a comedian who wants to be raw in my like raw form, I need to go somewhere where I can be free. I think that's what podcasts have become.
Yeah.
And to me, they're really generating so much support and a huge following. And in RFK's case, I just think he was just very dangerous to the Democrat. I just think he was very dangerous to the party's platform because a lot of people support him on both sides. And there was just a way of, I think, of uniting people that is scary to really both platforms.
Yeah.
It's like, whoa, there are Democrats supporting him as well. That's how Tulsi Gabbard was.
Yes.
Before she left the Democratic Party, she was like building following on both sides, and it was like, okay, no, she's a threat because she's actually taking votes from Trump, and she's not, in their minds, like she's not a bigot, or she's not, racially spewing things, but she's pulling both, voters from both sides, so yeah. And she did a lot of podcasts as well.
Yeah. Well, they both, I guess, in the case of both of them, and I know I've listened to maybe a few hours of RFK Jr. on maybe half a dozen different podcasts, largely just because I find them from a sociological perspective. I often pay attention to things as like, just like, almost like as just, if I remove myself from the society and just kind of pay attention to different trends, I just find it interesting. Is he right or wrong? I don't know enough to say, what he's saying is right or wrong. To me, that's almost secondary to kind of, for my interest in seeing kind of like, wow, what's going on? And why would somebody that seems to, he's a Democrat, but is not well liked by the Democratic Party at all. He says some pretty things that sound pretty outlandish, but he seems to back him up with stuff that I'm like, I would have to do a lot of research to say he's wrong on this or that, whatever.
Right.
But he's speaking out
Right.
against the establishment in ways that I'm like, oh yeah, of course he's gonna not be well liked on the side of the aisle that he's registered with. Anyway, yeah. Let's go back to abortion, and then I'll let you go here. You you mentioned abortion regret. Is that a pretty widespread thing when people get an
Yep.
abortion? Or is it a fringe thing? Is it a small percentage, or is it a lot of people that get an abortion end up on some level regretting it?
So, statistics show that 98% of women who have considered suicide have had abortions within a certain amount of time, prior to considering suicide. I mean, there are My Choice Story, Shout Your Abortion Too, Abortion Recovery, Abortion Survivors Network. I mean, Live Action. All of these platforms share stories of abortion regret. They're everywhere.
Wow.
They're all over social media. And I think the one who kind of became mainstream with her abortion regret was when Sharon Osbourne shared her story about how it actually physically, like, really messed her up. She had gotten an abortion at 17 years old, and so that definitely is a widespread thing. As far as post abortive support, I think we're talking more about it, but we need to talk even more about it. Different mental health resources for women to seek counseling after abortion. Pregnancy centers provide, but we have to really talk more about it, because I think we've normalized trauma in a way where it's been this empowering thing, and then you have a woman that says, like, actually it wasn't empowering, it was very painful, and this is what I experienced in aftermath. We often talk about, the statistic is like 99% of women who chose life over an abortion does not regret their decision. So women are not regretting keeping their children, but they do regret of having abortions. 4 out of every 10 women in church, 4 out of every 10 women who have abortions are actively attending church. So this is also a big issue for our church communities as well. And then I think, when it comes to the shame that women have carried, we have to find ways to really embrace women as they experience a loss like abortion, especially in church. There are all sorts of programs. There was this one program, it was called, I believe it was called, the Esther's program, where a church would adopt a family and sort of just help them with their children. But I hope to one day see, centers, pregnancy centers, even community centers that help families provide community and village that help them raise their children all the way up to their 18.
Wow.
But yeah, abortion regret is a thing. I do get calls and emails, and I had a young woman reach out to me who wanted to publicly share her story about, sort of having regretted her abortion and almost dying. So that's common as well. That happened, young woman right here in Connecticut. So I just think that women, when women see others share, then they feel more, encouraged to share. It's like an inclination to share their stories as well.
What are the main factors that would lead someone to get an abortion? Is it lack of financial resources to provide, or shame from a religious community of maybe having sex outside of marriage or something? I mean, I think you might be referring to the Lifeway study that was done a few years ago. That the whole 4 out of 10 women are church going women, and I remember in that study there was a few things said. Number one was the shame of having a baby out of wedlock was so profound. And then the shame of getting an abortion was profound. It was kind of like damned if you do, damned if you don't. And there was nowhere to go. And so it was kind of like a secret abortion that was just kind of on the side really quickly was to them the best available option. So there's certain things in there in our religious environments that obviously need to change. Anyway, my original question, what are some main factors that lead someone to get an abortion? Is it finances or?
So 73% of women would prefer to parent if they had resources. So to me, the abortion industry really uses fear and poverty as a tool to make its own self rich. And it is women it's this idea that you have to have, that you have to be privileged to parent. I also think it's just, it's something when you see statistics that show all of the women who are successful, who are millionaires, who are having abortions, especially in the industry, is it's a, it's a way you're messing your career, when you have a child. So seek an abortion. I mean, Michelle Williams got up literally at the Oscars and said that she made a choice, and that's basically how she got her award. I was like, are you kidding me? And actually, Twitter erupted. All sorts of women got on Twitter and was like, that was not it. That was inappropriate. But yeah, it usually is financial resources and circumstances and situations. A lot of women are, 64% of women are coerced by their partners. 40% of women will then go back and seek another abortion. And so a very, very small percentage of women seek abortion after rape and incest as well. And so I think these statistics sort of show us, the community of of women that feel neglected and underserved and even underrepresented. Scripture tells us to be voice for the voiceless. And so I think a lot of these women just don't feel empowered to say, like, this was my circumstances situation, and I just did not feel equipped to provide in this situation. And so then, therefore I made this decision. But very rarely is it, women skip it. I think this was heartbreaking, but there was this guy on TikTok, and he said that he was escorting his friend. This was a second friend he had done this to an abortion clinic to become unpregnant. And I think the most gripping part of that whole video was when she stood in the window of a store, and you could see her reflection. And that girl had to be about 6 months. Like, she was very clearly showing, and it had to be a late term facility. There's just no way, because their stomach was too big. And so, like, that's the culture and times is promoting that. That's what's getting millions and millions of views, or being laughed at or mocked. But in reality, women struggle after making abortion decisions.
Oh. Well, Treneé, thank you so much for coming on the show and for sharing your car with us this afternoon, and lots to think about.
I'm so sorry that I'm in my car.
It's totally fine.
It was one of those days. It was one of those days.
I have hosted a podcast from my car before, so there's no shame there. So where can people find where can people find out more about you? You got a website?
Yes. Please follow my Instagram. It's Rep Treneé McGee, and you can look up CGA, which is Connecticut General Assembly, and follow my page. You can even subscribe to my monthly newsletters to see what I'm updated doing. And my personal website and platforms are TreneéMcGee.com and my other social medias as well. So thank you so much for having me. This is great.
Thanks for coming on the show, Treneé. I really appreciate it.
This show is part of the Converge Podcast Network.